My dear listeners, I'm Auntie Grace. They called me a gold digger at my husband's funeral. His daughter, standing right there by the casket, dressed in black she'd probably bought that morning, looked me up and down with pure venom in her eyes and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I hope whatever money you're getting was worth it." I didn't respond. I just stood there, holding the folded piece of paper the lawyer had given me that morning, the will. Thomas's final words to his family, to me, to everyone who'd spent the last 3 years of our marriage treating me like I was some kind of con artist. But here's the thing about assumptions, about judgment, about people who are so convinced they know your heart that they never bother to actually look. Sometimes, the truth is so much better than revenge. Let me tell you how I got there. How I went from being called every name in the book to standing at a funeral, holding a will that would change everything, and how the man I loved, the man they said I'd married for money, gave me the greatest gift anyone ever could. Not wealth, something better. Welcome to True Heart Voices. If you love true stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps keep these voices alive. I always find it fascinating to read which cities and countries you're listening from, so don't hesitate to write a comment. Happy listening. I met Thomas Whitmore on a Tuesday afternoon in March, in the least romantic place imaginable, the waiting room of an art gallery during a plumbing emergency. I was 32 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer, barely making ends meet in a tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn. I'd gone to the gallery, a small, beautiful space in Chelsea, for an exhibition opening. Contemporary artists, most of them unknown, all of them talented. I'd scraped together enough money for the entry donation because art wasn't just something I enjoyed. It was oxygen. It was the thing that made life worth living. The pipes had burst in the building next door, and water was seeping through the walls. The opening was delayed. About 20 of us were standing around in the lobby, awkwardly checking our phones, when this man, older, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked at the painting on the wall and said, "That's a Rothko imitation, but the artist doesn't quite understand the emotional weight. They're mimicking technique without inhabiting the feeling." I'd turned to him, surprised. "You see it too? Everyone always tells me I'm overthinking art." His face had lit up. Overthinking art is impossible. Art is meant to be felt, analyzed, dissected, argued about. That's the whole point. We talked for 45 minutes while they fixed the pipes, about color theory and emotional resonance, about how art could save you when nothing else could, about the difference between creating for galleries and creating for yourself. His name was Thomas. He was a retired patent attorney, successful, comfortable, but not ostentatiously wealthy. He'd spent 30 years helping inventors protect their ideas, and now, in his semi-retirement, he was trying to figure out what his own ideas even were. "I woke up one day," he'd told me, stirring the terrible coffee the gallery had provided, and realized I'd spent my whole life helping other people create. But I'd never made anything myself, never painted, never written, never tried. "It's not too late," I'd said, "isn't it?" He'd smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I'm 58 years old. I have adult children who think I should be playing golf and planning my retirement in Florida. I have friends who collect art but don't understand it. And I have this ache inside me that says I've wasted my time." I'd looked at him, really looked at him, and seen something I recognized. Loneliness, creative hunger, the specific kind of sadness that comes from living a responsible, practical life while your soul slowly starves. "Then start now," I'd said simply. "Today, not tomorrow, not when things are perfect. Now." He'd stared at me for a long moment. Then he'd pulled out his phone. "Can I have your number? I'd like to, I don't know, talk more. Maybe you could recommend some beginner classes or—" "I teach a watercolor workshop on Saturday mornings," I'd interrupted. "Community Center in Park Slope. $15, bring supplies and an open mind. He'd shown up that Saturday, and the next, and the one after that. Thomas was terrible at watercolors, by the way. Truly, genuinely terrible. His hands, so steady when he was reviewing patent documents, shook when he held a brush. His color mixing was muddy. His compositions were stiff and overly planned. But he showed up every single week with this look of determined joy on his face. And he tried. God, he tried so hard. After the 4th class, he'd asked if I wanted to get coffee. We'd gone to a little cafe down the street, and he'd told me about his life. His marriage of 30 years that had ended in divorce 5 years ago. Amicable but lonely. 2 people who'd grown into strangers. His 2 adult children, Victoria, 34, a corporate lawyer in Manhattan, and Christopher, 31, working in finance, both successful, both distant. They think I'm having a midlife crisis, he'd said, laughing without much humor. Taking art classes, going to galleries. They keep sending me links to golf communities and asking when I'm going to settle down into retirement. But you don't want to settle down. I want to wake up, he'd said quietly. I spent 30 years asleep, doing what I was supposed to do, being responsible, and I was good at it. But Vanessa, he'd used my name for the first time, and something about the way he said it made my heart skip. I don't want to die having never really lived. I'd understood that. Completely. Viscerally. I'd spent my 20s struggling, waiting tables, taking any design work I could find, living on ramen and hope. I'd been engaged once to a guy who'd told me I needed to grow up and get a real job instead of playing with Photoshop. I'd broken it off and spent a year rebuilding myself, learning that my art wasn't a hobby or a phase. It was who I was, Thomas and I. We got each other. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks through the city, stopping at every gallery we could find. Walks turned into late-night phone calls where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Childhood dreams, favorite books, the way light looked different in autumn. He made me laugh. He listened, really listened when I talked. He looked at my design work with genuine interest, asking questions, offering thoughtful feedback. He treated my creativity like it mattered, like I mattered, in a way no one ever had before. And I made him feel young again, not in some gross, fetishizing way, but in the way that matters, reminding him that life didn't end at 60, that curiosity was ageless, that it was okay to want more than a comfortable retirement and grandchildren who visited on holidays. 6 months after we met, he kissed me. We were standing in front of a Monet exhibit at the Met, and he just said something about how the water lilies looked like they were dissolving into light, and I'd turned to respond, and he'd just kissed me. Soft, tentative, asking permission even in the gesture. When he pulled back, his face was flushed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You're so much younger, and I don't want you to think. Thomas, I'd interrupted. I'm 33 years old. I know what I want, and I want this. I want you. Why? He'd looked genuinely confused. I'm almost 60. I'm old enough to be your father. You could be with someone your own age, someone who, what? Someone who doesn't see me? Someone who doesn't understand why I cry at paintings or work until 3 a.m. on a design project because the kerning isn't quite right? I'd taken his hand. Age is just a number, Thomas. What matters is how you make me feel, and you make me feel seen, understood, like I'm not too much or not enough, like I'm exactly right. His eyes had filled with tears. You make me feel alive. Then let's be alive together. We dated for a year before he proposed, a beautiful, simple year of gallery visits and painting sessions and quiet dinners at his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. He introduced me to classical music. I introduced him to street art. He taught me about patent law. Fascinating, actually, when you understood it was about protecting creativity. I taught him about color theory and design principles. We fit. Not because we were the same age or from the same background or living the same life stage, but because we understood each other in the ways that mattered. When he proposed, at the same gallery where we'd met in front of the same terrible Rothko imitation, I said yes without hesitation. That's when everything changed. His children. Victoria showed up at my apartment 3 days after we announced our engagement. I'd never met her before. Thomas had wanted to take things slow, introduce me gradually. But there she was at my door, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my rent, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutins. "So you're the woman who's marrying my father," she'd said without preamble. No hello, no introduction, just accusation. "I'm Vanessa." I'd offered my hand. She didn't take it. "Would you like to come in? I can make coffee." "Let's not pretend this is a social call." She'd stepped into my tiny studio, looking around with barely concealed disdain. "I need you to understand something. My father is a very wealthy man, and you're, what? A struggling artist? A graphic designer working out of a studio apartment?" "I'm a person who loves your father," I'd said quietly. "You're a gold digger." She'd said it so matter-of-factly, like it was an obvious truth. "And I want you to know that my brother and I will be watching very closely. If you think you're going to manipulate him, convince him to change his will, isolate him from his family, I would never. Save it." She'd pulled out a business card, set it on my counter. "That's my lawyer. When this charade falls apart, and it will, you're going to sign a post-nuptial agreement stating you have no claim to any of my father's assets. Are we clear?" I'd stared at her, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "I don't want your father's money, I want your father." She'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Sure you do. A 33-year-old woman with no prospects just happens to fall madly in love with a 59-year-old millionaire. Do you know how that sounds? It sounds like love, which apparently you wouldn't recognize." Her face had hardened. "Stay away from him, or I will make your life a living hell." She'd left, and I'd stood there in my tiny apartment shaking. That evening, I'd told Thomas what happened. He'd gone pale with anger. "She came to your apartment? She threatened you?" "Thomas, it's okay." "It's not okay." He'd pulled out his phone, started dialing. "I'm calling her right now. She has no right." "Please don't." I'd put my hand over his phone. "It'll just make it worse. She's your daughter. She's protective. She probably thinks you're after my money, which is insulting to both of us." He'd set down the phone, taken my hands. "Vanessa, I need you to understand something. My children and we're not close. Haven't been for years. After the divorce, they sided with their mother. Not that there were sides exactly, but they blamed me for not trying harder, for working too much, for not being the father they wanted. And now that I'm actually happy, actually living instead of just existing, they're angry about it. They want the version of me that fit into their narrative." "What narrative?" "The sad divorced dad who plays golf and sends checks and doesn't ask for anything. The one who doesn't disrupt their lives or expect them to actually care about him as a person." His voice was bitter. "But you know what? I'm done being that person. I'm done making myself smaller so they can feel comfortable. I love you. I want to marry you. And if they can't accept that, then that's their problem, not ours." I'd wanted to believe him. God, I'd wanted to believe it was that simple. But a small voice in the back of my head whispered, "This is just the beginning." We got married 4 months later, in a small ceremony at City Hall, followed by dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant with a handful of close friends. Victoria and Christopher didn't come. Thomas had invited them, formally, with handwritten notes explaining how much it would mean to him if they were there. They'd both declined. Victoria sent a 2-line email. "We cannot in good conscience support this marriage. We hope you come to your senses soon." Christopher had been slightly more diplomatic, but equally absent. "Dad, I think you're making a mistake. When you're ready to talk about it, I'm here, but I can't watch you do this." On our wedding day, I'd watched Thomas's face as we waited for them to arrive, even though we both knew they wouldn't. The hope dying slowly in his eyes, the way he'd straightened his shoulders and smiled at me, determined not to let their absence ruin our day. "Their loss," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "I have you, that's all that matters." But I'd seen the hurt underneath, the grief of a father whose children had chosen judgment over love. At dinner, surrounded by my friends and the few colleagues of Thomas's who'd come, someone had asked if we were planning a honeymoon. "Actually," Thomas had said, squeezing my hand, "we're working on something together, a project." I'd looked at him, surprised. We hadn't discussed any project. He'd smiled at me, that soft, excited smile I'd fallen in love with. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how it's never too late to start creating, and I want to do something meaningful, something that matters." "What kind of project?" one of my friends had asked. "I'm not sure yet," Thomas had admitted, "but I know I want it to involve art and helping people, and Vanessa." He looked at me. "She's taught me that creativity isn't selfish, it's generous. It's how we connect with each other, how we make sense of the world. And I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure other people have that chance too." I'd felt tears prick my eyes. "Thomas, we'll figure it out together," he'd said simply. And we did. The first year of our marriage was the happiest of my life. We lived in Thomas's brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a beautiful 3-story home with big windows and creaky floors and a garden out back where we'd have coffee in the mornings. I'd worried about moving in, about losing my independence, but Thomas made it clear from day one, this was our home. He converted the 3rd floor into a studio for me, northern light, everything I needed for design work, walls I could paint on. "Create," he'd said simply. "This is your space. Fill it with whatever you need." I did, and slowly my design work started taking off. I got better clients, bigger projects, things I could actually be proud of. Thomas started painting more seriously. He was still terrible, objectively speaking, but he improved. More importantly, he was happy. He'd spend hours in the garden trying to capture the way light filtered through the leaves, and he'd come in with paint in his hair and this look of pure contentment on his face. We volunteered together at a community arts center in Crown Heights, teaching free classes to kids and adults who couldn't afford formal lessons. Thomas loved it. Watching him with the students, patient, encouraging, genuinely interested in their work, I fell in love with him all over again. He wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, my best friend, the person who made me want to be better, do better, create more. But his children, they never stopped. Victoria called once a month, always with some version of the same conversation. "Dad, we need to talk about your will, about protecting your assets, about making sure you're not being taken advantage of." Christopher sent articles about age gap relationships and financial abuse, forwarded without comment but with clear implication. They never visited, never called just to talk, never asked how Thomas was doing, what he was working on, whether he was happy. They only cared about the money. And I watched it break his heart piece by piece over those 3 years. It started small, the little comments, the lawyer's letters. About 6 months into our marriage, Thomas received a formal letter from Victoria's law firm. Not from Victoria directly, no, she was too smart for that. From her firm, on official letterhead, requesting a meeting to discuss estate planning and asset protection. Thomas had crumpled it up and thrown it in the trash. "They don't call to ask how I'm doing," he'd said, his voice tight. "They don't ask about my life, my happiness, what I'm working on. But they'll send lawyers to make sure I'm not giving my money to the wrong person. Maybe they're just worried. They're worried about their inheritance." He'd looked at me, and I'd seen real anger there for the first time. "Vanessa, I know what this is. I've been dealing with it since the divorce. They think I owe them something. That because I'm their father, everything I've built belongs to them. You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. I don't want to. He'd pulled me close. I want to spend my time with you, building something that actually matters. That's when he told me about the idea that had been forming in his mind. What if, he'd said slowly, we started a foundation, something to help young artists who are struggling the way you struggled. Grants, studio space, mentorship, real support, not just empty encouragement. I'd stared at him. Thomas, that would cost. I have the money, he'd interrupted. And what's the point of having it if I can't use it for something meaningful? My kids don't need it. Victoria makes $250,000 a year. Christopher's in finance. He's doing fine. They want my money because it's there, not because they need it. They'll hate me even more if you do this. They already hate you. He'd said it matter-of-factly, sadly. Nothing we do will change that. But at least this way, something good comes from it. We'd started planning, researching nonprofits, meeting with lawyers, our own, not Victoria's, about how to structure it properly. It consumed us in the best way, gave us a shared purpose beyond just being married. But Victoria found out. I don't know how. Maybe Thomas had mentioned it to Christopher in one of their brief, stilted phone conversations. Maybe she had friends at the law firm we'd consulted. But 3 weeks after we'd started serious planning, she showed up at the house, uninvited, furious. I was in my studio when the doorbell rang. Thomas answered, and I heard her voice carry up the stairs. Are you insane? A foundation? You're going to give away millions of dollars to random artists because your child bride convinced you it's meaningful. Victoria, lower your voice. No, I will not lower my voice. This is exactly what I warned you about. She's manipulating you, Dad. Can't you see that? She's isolated you from your family, convinced you to spend your money on her pet projects. They're our projects, Thomas said firmly, and Vanessa hasn't manipulated anyone. She's opened my eyes to what actually matters, something you've never understood. What matters is family. Your real family, Christopher and me. We're your children. Then act like it. His voice was cold now. When's the last time you called just to talk? When's the last time you asked about my life, my interests, whether I'm happy? You only care about me when it involves money. That's not fair. It's completely fair. I heard him move toward the door. And I'm done justifying my choices to you. This is my money, my life, and I'll spend it how I see fit. If you can't accept that, then don't come back. You're going to regret this. Her voice was shaking. When she leaves you, and she will, Dad, gold diggers always do, you're going to realize we were right, and don't come crying to us when it happens. The door slammed. I heard Thomas's footsteps on the stairs, slower than usual. When he reached my studio, his face was gray. Thomas. I'm fine, he said, but he wasn't. He sank into the chair by my desk, suddenly looking every one of his 61 years. I keep hoping they'll come around, that they'll see how happy I am, how good you are for me, but they can't see past the money. I knelt beside him, took his hands. We don't have to do the foundation. If it's causing this much trouble, no. He squeezed my hands. We're doing it. Maybe not right away, but we're doing it. Because you're right. It matters. Creating matters. Helping people matters. And I'd rather spend my money on something meaningful than leave it to children who only want it to have it. But I'd seen the pain in his eyes, the grief, and I'd started to wonder, what would happen when he was gone? What would Victoria and Christopher do to me then? Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months after our wedding. He'd been feeling tired, losing weight, having stomach pains he'd brushed off as stress. When the pain got too bad to ignore, we went to the doctor. Tests, scans, a biopsy, stage 4, inoperable, maybe 6 months to a year with treatment. I remember sitting in the oncologist's office, watching Thomas's face as the doctor explained the prognosis, and feeling like the floor was disappearing beneath me. This man who'd taught me to see life differently, who'd made me believe in partnership and shared purpose, he was dying. "I want to fight," Thomas had said quietly, "not because I think I can win, but because I want more time, with Vanessa, to finish what we started." We called Victoria and Christopher that evening, told them together on speakerphone. Victoria's response: "How long have you known? Have you updated your will? We need to discuss arrangements." "Jesus, Victoria." Christopher's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "He just told us he has cancer. Can you not? I'm being practical. Someone has to be." Thomas had hung up on them. "I don't want them here," he'd said, his voice hollow. "If they come, it'll just be to hover around like vultures, counting days, calculating values." "They're your children," I'd said softly. "Maybe this will change things. Maybe it won't." He'd looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I've known them their whole lives, Vanessa. This won't make them suddenly care about me as a person. It'll just make them more aggressive about the money." He was right. Thomas lived for 11 months after the diagnosis, 11 months of chemo and pain management and stolen moments of beauty between the suffering. We traveled when he felt strong enough. Short trips, nothing too ambitious. A weekend in the Berkshires, a week in Maine, anywhere with art and nature and quiet. We worked on the foundation planning, refining the vision. Thomas was determined to see it properly structured before he died. He met with lawyers, drafted documents, set up the initial funding. "I want it to be real," he'd told me during one of his good days, sitting in the garden with his sketchbook. "Not just an idea, real, so it can help people after I'm gone." His children visited twice. The first time, Victoria came alone, ostensibly to help with medical decisions. She'd stayed for 2 hours, most of which she spent in Thomas's study going through files until I'd asked her to leave. The second time, both Victoria and Christopher came. They took Thomas out to lunch, without me, deliberately, and when he came back, he was exhausted and upset. "They want me to change the will," he'd told me, lying down with his head in my lap. "Leave everything to them. They said you'll be taken care of with a small trust, but the bulk should go to family." "What did you tell them?" I told them I'd already made my decision. He'd looked up at me. "Vanessa, there's something I need to tell you about the will." My heart had stuttered. "Okay." "You're not in it." I'd stared at him, trying to process. "What?" "You're not inheriting anything. Not the house, not the money, nothing." He'd sat up slowly, taking my hands. "Before you get upset, let me explain. I know you don't care about the money. I know you married me for the right reasons. But my children will never believe that. They'll contest the will, make your life hell, drag you through courts for years." "Thomas, so I'm leaving everything to the foundation, the Whitmore Foundation for Emerging Artists. Everything I have, the house, the investments, all of it. It'll fund grants and studio spaces and mentorship programs. Everything we talked about, everything that actually matters." I'd felt tears streaming down my face. "But your children will get nothing." He'd smiled, and it was fierce. "And that's the point. They wanted the money so badly, treated you so terribly, treated me like a checkbook instead of a person. So they get nothing, and the world gets beauty instead. Artists who are struggling the way you struggled, they'll get a chance. That's my legacy, not ungrateful children, creation. They'll hate me even more. Let them." He'd cupped my face. "You've given me the best years of my life. You've shown me what love actually looks like. You don't need my money to prove that. But those artists, they need the help. And this way, something good comes from all of it. From the pain, from the judgment, from everything." I'd held him while he cried, understanding the weight of what he was doing, disinheriting his children, choosing purpose over family legacy, choosing love, For me, for art, for something bigger, over obligation. Thomas died on a Tuesday morning in October with me holding his hand and autumn lights streaming through the bedroom windows. His last words were, "Thank you for showing me how to live." Victoria and Christopher arrived within hours of his death, not to grieve, but to organize, to claim. And 3 days later, at the funeral, Victoria looked at me with such hatred and called me a gold digger. Standing there by the casket, I'd felt nothing but sadness, not for me, for Thomas, for the fact that his children were so consumed with what they thought they deserved that they couldn't see what they'd lost, a father who'd loved them despite everything. And the next day, at the reading of the will, I was going to watch them lose something else, everything they'd been waiting for. The lawyer's office was on the 37th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, all glass and steel and expensive silence, the kind of place that made you whisper even when there was no reason to. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to the funeral 2 days before. I hadn't slept much, couldn't stop thinking about Thomas's face in those final weeks, the way he'd smiled when he talked about the foundation, the peace in his eyes when he'd explained his decision. Victoria and Christopher were already there when I walked into the conference room. They sat on one side of the long mahogany table, Victoria in a black Chanel suit, Christopher in a dark gray three-piece. They looked like they were attending a board meeting, not the reading of their father's will. Victoria's eyes tracked me as I entered. Cold, assessing. "Vanessa," she said, not getting up, not offering condolences, just my name, flat and hostile. "Victoria, Christopher." I nodded at both of them, took a seat on the opposite side of the table, as far from them as I could get. Christopher at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "I know you and Dad were close." "Thank you," I said. "Close," Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Victoria," Christopher warned. "What? We're all thinking it." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. 3 years. You were married for 3 years, and now you're about to find out exactly what 3 years of your performance was worth. I didn't respond, just folded my hands in my lap and waited. The door opened and Thomas's lawyer, Edward Chen, a dignified man in his 60s who'd handled Thomas's legal affairs for 20 years, entered with a leather portfolio. "Good morning," he said, his voice professionally neutral. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time." "Let's just get on with it," Victoria said. "We all know why we're here." Edward's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Distaste, maybe, or pity. He sat at the head of the table, opened the portfolio, and pulled out several documents. "Thomas's will is straightforward," he began. "He was very clear about his wishes, and he updated this document 3 months ago, while he was still of sound mind and body. I can assure you it will stand up to any legal challenge." Victoria's jaw tightened at that last part. She'd been planning to contest it then. Of course she had. "The estate is valued at approximately $8.3 million, Edward continued. "This includes the Brooklyn Heights property, investment accounts, retirement funds, and various other assets." I watched Victoria's face, watched her do the mental math, calculating, already spending it. "Now," Edward said, looking at each of us in turn. "Before I read the specific bequests, I want to share something Thomas asked me to include, a letter, to all of you." He pulled out a single sheet of paper, Thomas's handwriting clear and careful at the top, and he began to read. "To my children, Victoria and Christopher, and to my beloved wife, Vanessa. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I truly hope, that my death has given you some time to reflect on the last few years, on what we've become to each other, or failed to become, Victoria Christopher. I loved you from the moment you were born, changed your diapers, stayed up with you when you were sick, taught you to ride bikes and helped with homework and attended every school event I could manage. I worked long hours to give you good lives, good educations, opportunities I never had, and I was proud of you. So proud. But somewhere along the way, our relationship became transactional. You stopped calling unless you needed something, stopped visiting unless there was an occasion. And when I finally found happiness again, real, genuine happiness with Vanessa, you couldn't see past the age difference to the love underneath. You called her a gold digger. You threatened her. You made it clear that you didn't care about my happiness, only about protecting your inheritance. As if my money belonged to you simply because you were born. It doesn't. I earned it. I saved it. And I get to decide what happens to it. Vanessa, my darling girl, you never asked me for anything, not once in 3 years. You loved me when I was terrified to start painting. You held my hand through chemo. You made me laugh on my worst days. You showed me that life doesn't end at 60, that creativity and joy and love are always possible if you're brave enough to reach for them. You gave me the greatest gift anyone ever could. You made me feel alive again. So here's what I've decided. Edward paused, looked up. Victoria was leaning forward, barely breathing. Christopher's hands were flat on the table, tense. I felt numb, detached, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Edward continued reading. I am leaving my entire estate, all $8.3 million, the house, everything, to establish the Whitmore Foundation for Emerging Artists, a 501c3, nonprofit dedicated to supporting young artists who are struggling financially but rich in talent and vision. The foundation will provide grants, studio space, mentorship, and resources. It will be managed by a board of trustees, with Vanessa serving as the executive director if she chooses to accept the position. The role comes with a modest salary, enough to live on comfortably, but nothing extravagant. The house will become the foundation's headquarters, with the upper floors converted to artist studios and the main floor used for classes and exhibitions. To Victoria and Christopher, you are each receiving $1 to confirm that you were not forgotten, but deliberately excluded from further inheritance. To Vanessa, you are receiving my love, my gratitude, and the opportunity to continue the work we started together. Not money, because I know that's not why you married me, but purpose, legacy, the chance to help others the way you helped me. This is my final wish, my final act, and I truly hope, that someday my children will understand why I did this. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria moved first. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward, hitting the floor with a crack that made everyone jump. No. Her voice was shaking. No, that's not. He can't. Ms. Whitmore, Edward said calmly. Your father was very clear about his wishes. This is fraud. She whirled on me, her face contorted with rage. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against us. You isolated him and convinced him to give away millions of dollars to some vanity project. Victoria, please sit down, Christopher said quietly, but his face was ashen. Sit down? Are you kidding me? She grabbed the edge of the table. Christopher, do you understand what just happened? We just got disinherited. $8 million gone. To fund art classes for random people while she jabbed a finger at me. Gets to play director and live in his house and pretend she's some kind of saint. I don't want the house, I said quietly. It was the first thing I'd said since Edward started reading. I don't want any of it. Bullshit. Victoria's voice was venomous. You manipulated him into this. You spent 3 years convincing him we didn't love him, that we only wanted his money, and look, now you've got everything. I have nothing, I said, and I felt tears starting. Not for the money, for Thomas, for the fact that even now, even after hearing his words, his daughter couldn't see past her greed to the pain underneath. I lost my husband, the man I loved, and all I have left is the chance to honor his wishes. That's all. Honor his wishes? Victoria laughed, but it was a harsh, broken sound. He was a sick old man, dying and desperate, and you took advantage of that. You whispered in his ear, convinced him his own children were the enemy. You convinced him of that yourselves, I said, my voice harder now. You never called unless you wanted something, never visited unless it was to check on his will. You treated him like an ATM instead of a father. How dare you, Ms. Whitmore? Edward interrupted firmly. The will is legally sound. It was witnessed, notarized, and updated while your father was of sound mind. I was present for the signing. He was clear, coherent, and absolutely certain of his decision. You can contest it if you wish, but I assure you, you will lose. Victoria's hands were shaking. She looked at Christopher. Tell her. Tell them we're contesting this. Christopher was staring at the letter, still lying on the table. He really believed we only cared about the money. Christopher, did we ever prove him wrong? Christopher looked up at his sister, and I saw something break in his face. When's the last time you called him just to talk? When's the last time you asked about his life, his interests, whether he was happy? That's not the point. That's exactly the point. He stood up slowly. We lost our father, Victoria, and we lost him long before he died. We pushed him away. We judged his choices. We treated his wife like a criminal because we were so obsessed with protecting money we hadn't even earned. And now, he looked at the will. Now he's made sure we understand exactly how that felt. So what, you're just giving up? Accepting this? I'm accepting that he was right. Christopher picked up his coat. I'm sorry, Vanessa, for everything, for how we treated you, for not seeing what you meant to him, and I'm sorry I waited until he was gone to understand. He walked out, leaving Victoria and me alone with Edward. Victoria stared at the door her brother had just walked through. Then she turned to me, and the look in her eyes was pure hatred. This isn't over, she said, quietly. I will fight this. I will make your life a living hell. You will regret the day you met my father. I could never regret meeting him, I said simply. He was the best thing that ever happened to me. And if spending the rest of my life honoring his wishes makes you angry, then I guess that's just proof he was right about you. She grabbed her bag and walked out without another word, leaving me alone with Edward and Thomas's final gift. Not money. Something better. I sat in that conference room for a long time after Victoria left. Just sat there staring at the letter Edward had read, Thomas's handwriting blurring through my tears. Vanessa, Edward said gently. Are you all right? I don't know, I admitted. I knew. Thomas told me what he was planning, but hearing it like this, seeing their faces, I looked up at him. He really left them $1 each? He did. It's a legal formality, proof that they weren't accidentally forgotten, that he deliberately chose to exclude them. Edward gathered the papers slowly. For what it's worth, I knew Thomas for 20 years. He was one of the most thoughtful, deliberate people I ever met. This decision wasn't made lightly or in anger. It was made with purpose. He wanted them to understand, I said quietly, that love isn't transactional, that you can't treat people like assets and expect to inherit their affection. Exactly. Edward pulled out another envelope, this one sealed. He left this for you, asked me to give it to you privately after the reading. My hands trembled as I took it, my name on the front in Thomas's careful script. Take your time, Edward said, standing. I'll be in my office when you're ready to discuss next steps for the foundation. He left me alone. I opened the envelope slowly, like it might break. Inside was a letter. 2 pages, front and back, every word in Thomas's handwriting. My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you've just sat through what was probably the most uncomfortable hour of your life, watching my children react to being disinherited. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to hold your hand through it. I'm sorry for a lot of things, actually. I'm sorry I didn't have more time. Sorry I couldn't give you the long marriage you deserved, the decades of partnership I wanted to give you. Sorry that my children made our brief time together harder than it should have been. But I'm not sorry I married you. That was the best decision I ever made. You asked me once, in one of our late-night conversations, why I loved you. Do you remember? You said you couldn't understand what a 60-year-old man could possibly see in a 32-year-old woman beyond the obvious. You were genuinely confused, like you couldn't see your own worth. So let me tell you, I love you because you see the world as it could be, not just as it is. Because you believe that beauty matters, that creativity isn't frivolous, that helping people make art is just as important as helping them survive. You reminded me that there's more to life than accumulating wealth and checking off society's boxes. I love you because you're brave in ways I never was. You walked away from security to pursue your passion. You loved me despite knowing people would judge you, call you names, question your motives. You stayed even when my children made it clear you weren't welcome. That takes courage. And I love you because you loved me. Not the successful lawyer, not the comfortable bank account, not the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. Me. The man who was terrified to pick up a paintbrush at 58 because he might be bad at it. The man who cried during Rothko exhibits and wanted to spend his weekends volunteering instead of golfing. You loved the person I'd buried under decades of responsibility and helped me find him again. That's worth more than any amount of money. Now, about the foundation. I know this is a heavy burden to place on you. You didn't ask to become the director of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. But I also know that you're the only person I trust to do this right, to make it about the art and the artists, not the prestige or the publicity. To remember that we started this because we wanted to help people like you were. Talented, struggling, desperate for just one person to believe in them. You don't have to accept the position. Edward will help you structure it so someone else can run it if you prefer, but I hope you will. I hope you'll take the house we filled with laughter and turn it into a space where creativity can flourish. I hope you'll use my money I spent 30 years accumulating while forgetting to actually live, to help others live while they're young enough to enjoy it. That would make me so happy. As for Victoria and Christopher, I know you're probably feeling guilty right now, wondering if I was too harsh, if there was another way. But Vanessa, I tried. For years before I met you, I tried to have a real relationship with them. I invited them to dinner, asked about their lives, tried to find common ground, and they showed up when it was convenient, when there was something to gain, but never just because they wanted to see their father. When I told them about you, they didn't ask if I was happy. They asked about the prenup. When I got sick, they didn't ask how I was feeling. They asked about the will. I'm not cutting them out to punish them. I'm cutting them out because giving them money won't fix our relationship. It never did. And because there are better uses for it. Uses that would have made them roll their eyes and call me foolish, but uses that actually matter. Live well, my darling girl. Create. Help others create. Fill the world with beauty. And know that every single day of our marriage was a gift I never expected and will be eternally grateful for. You made an old man feel young again. You made me believe it wasn't too late to become who I was supposed to be. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for every gallery visit and terrible painting lesson and late-night conversation about nothing and everything. You were the great love of my life. I hope I was worthy of being yours. All my love, always Thomas. I don't know how long I sat there crying, long enough that Edward came back to check on me, saw my face, and quietly left again. Thomas's words washed over me in waves. The validation, the love, The absolute certainty that what we had was real, that I hadn't imagined it or inflated it in my grief. He'd seen me, really seen me. And he'd trusted me with something more valuable than money, his legacy, his dreams, the chance to make a real difference. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and wiped my eyes. Then I stood up, walked to Edward's office, and knocked. "Come in," he called. I opened the door. "I'll do it, the foundation. I'll be the director." Edward smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Thomas was, too." "What's next?" "Next, we start the legal process of transferring assets, establishing the nonprofit, converting the house. It'll take a few months. In the meantime..." He pulled out another folder. "Thomas set aside funds to pay you a living stipend during the transition. He didn't want you to struggle while everything was being organized. Of course he did. Even in death, Thomas was taking care of me." "There's one more thing," Edward said, his expression turning serious. "Victoria is going to contest the will. She's already called my office twice since leaving. She's claiming undue influence, diminished capacity, that you manipulated him." "Let her," I said quietly. "I have nothing to hide. Thomas was clear about his wishes. You were there. His doctors can attest he was of sound mind. And honestly, if fighting this helps her process her grief, let her fight. It could get ugly. It already is ugly." I met his eyes. "But I'm not going to let her threat stop me from honoring Thomas's wishes. He believed in this. Believed in me. That's all that matters." Edward nodded slowly. "You're stronger than you look." "Thomas taught me that," I said. "He taught me a lot of things." The news spread quickly. Victoria made sure of it. Within a week, she'd given interviews to 2 gossip blogs and a local news station, painting herself as the grieving daughter who'd been cruelly cut out of her father's will by his manipulative gold-digger wife. She had photos, pictures of me and Thomas where the age difference was obvious, shots from our wedding where she and Christopher were conspicuously absent. The headlines were brutal. "Young widow inherits millions after 3-year marriage. Children contest will, claim gold digger, manipulated dying father, age gap marriage ends in family drama over 8-mare estate." Except they got it wrong. All of them. Because I hadn't inherited millions. The foundation had. And when journalists actually read the will, when they talked to Edward, when they looked into the nonprofit filings, the narrative started to shift. A different set of headlines appeared. "Late attorney leaves entire estate to Arts Foundation. Not young wife. Widow becomes nonprofit director. Donates inheritance to charity. Disinherited children fought over money that went to emerging artists." The comment sections were interesting. Wait, so she didn't get the money? Then what were the kids even fighting about? He left everything to charity and they're calling her the gold digger? The math ain't mathing. If she was a gold digger, she did a terrible job. She got a nonprofit director's salary and they got $1 each. Seems like karma to me. This is actually beautiful. He knew his kids were greedy, so he gave it all away. Legend. Victoria's social media campaign backfired spectacularly. The more she talked about being victimized, the more people pointed out that she was a wealthy lawyer, fighting to take money from charity. It wasn't a good look. Christopher stayed, silent. Didn't comment publicly, didn't join Victoria's crusade. I wondered if he meant what he said in the lawyer's office about understanding why Thomas did it. I hoped he did. And me? I stayed quiet too. Didn't give interviews, didn't engage with the drama. Just started working with Edward and a team of consultants to build the foundation Thomas had envisioned. I had work to do, art to support, a promise to keep. The rest was just noise. 3 months later, Victoria's contest was dismissed. The judge reviewed the medical records, interviewed Thomas's doctors, read the depositions, and she ruled that Thomas Whitmore had been of sound mind and body when he wrote his will, that there was no evidence of undue influence, and that his decision to leave his estate to charity was both legal and final. Victoria could appeal, but her lawyers advised against it. She'd already spent tens of thousands on legal fees for nothing. Throwing more money at a losing battle wouldn't change the outcome. She'd lost, not just the money, but the moral high ground, public sympathy, and, though I don't think she realized it yet, the last chance to honor her father's memory by accepting his wishes with grace. I felt sad for her, truly, because she'd spent so much energy fighting for money that she'd never stopped to grieve, never stopped to ask why her father had felt so unloved by his own children that he'd chosen to give everything away instead. But that was her journey, her healing to do or not do. Mine was different. The Whitmore Foundation for Emerging Artists officially opened 18 months after Thomas died. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights had been transformed. The third floor, my old studio, was now 3 smaller studios available to artists on 6-month residencies. The second floor housed classrooms and a small gallery space. The main floor was administrative offices and a community room where we held free workshops every weekend. The garden where Thomas used to paint, where he'd spend hours trying to capture the light through the leaves, became a sculpture garden. Small, intimate, filled with work from the artists we supported. We gave out our first grants that spring. 12 emerging artists, ranging from 22 to 45 years old, each receiving $15,000 and 6 months of mentorship. No strings attached, just belief, just support, just someone saying, "Your art matters, and we want to help you make it." I stood in the garden during the opening reception, watching our first cohort of artists mingle with donors and community members, and I felt Thomas everywhere. In the light, in the laughter, in the way a young painter was showing her work to an older couple, her face lit up with nervous excitement. This was what he'd wanted, what we'd dreamed about together on quiet evenings, planning and imagining and hoping. "Ms. Whitmore?" I turned. A young woman stood there, mid-20s, nervous smile, portfolio tucked under her arm. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to thank you. I'm one of the grant recipients, Maya Chen. And this money, it's changing my life. I can quit my third job, actually focus on my work. I can breathe." My throat tightened. "That's what we want. That's what this is for. Can I ask you something?" She hesitated. "Why did you do this? I read about the will and the family drama and everything. You could have fought for the money, probably won, but you didn't. You just built this instead. Why?" I looked at the house, at the garden, at the people filling the space with creativity and hope. Because my husband taught me that love isn't about what you take. I said softly, "It's about what you give, what you create, what you leave behind, and this, helping artists like you, this is love, real love, the kind that lasts." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "He must have been an amazing man." "He was," I said. "He really, really was." I was in the office reviewing applications for our second round of grants when the receptionist buzzed. "Vanessa? There's someone here to see you. Says his name is Christopher Whitmore." I froze. Christopher, Thomas's son. I hadn't seen or heard from him since the will reading, almost 2 years ago. "Should I send him away?" the receptionist asked carefully. She knew the history. "No," I said. "Send him up." I stood, smoothed my skirt, and waited. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to expect. More accusations? Legal threats? Anger that had been simmering for 2 years? Christopher knocked softly, then opened the door. He looked different. Older somehow. Tired, but his eyes were clearer than I remembered. "Vanessa," he said. "Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "What are you doing here, Christopher?" He looked around the office, at the art on the walls, the grant applications on my desk, the photos of our artist residents. I wanted to see it, the foundation, what Dad created, what you've built. "Why?" Because I've been thinking a lot about what he said in the will, about how we treated him like a checkbook instead of a person, about how we never called unless we wanted something. He met my eyes. He was right about all of it. And I've been trying to understand why I didn't see it until it was too late. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He did, slowly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to take up space here. I'm in therapy, he said abruptly. Have been for a year, working through a lot of things. My relationship with my father, with money, with what I thought I was owed just because I was born. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I have some issues with entitlement. That's a brave thing to admit. It's an overdue thing to admit. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned it to show me. This is my daughter, Emma. She's 6 months old. I looked at the photo. A beautiful baby with Christopher's eyes. Congratulations, I said carefully. When she was born, all I could think about was my dad, how he'd never meet her, how I'd pushed him away for 3 years, treated him like he was being ridiculous for wanting to be happy, and now he was gone. And my daughter would never know her grandfather because I was too stubborn and too greedy to just love him. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Vanessa, for how I treated you, for the things Victoria said, the things I didn't say but should have, for not seeing what you gave him, for not being grateful that someone made my father happy in his last years. Tears were streaming down his face now. You loved him, really loved him, and we punished you for it. I felt my own tears starting. Christopher, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I understand what he was trying to teach us, and I want Emma to grow up different, to understand that people matter more than money, that love isn't transactional. He wiped his eyes. I want her to know about her grandfather, not the version Victoria's been telling, the man who was manipulated and stolen from, but the real him, the man who found love and courage and purpose at 60, the man who gave everything away because he believed in something bigger than himself. I can help with that, I said quietly. I have photos, stories, his paintings, terrible paintings, but he was so proud of them. Christopher laughed through his tears. He really was terrible, wasn't he? Absolutely awful, I agreed, smiling. But he didn't care. That's what made him wonderful. He created anyway. We sat in silence for a moment. Victoria's not doing well, Christopher said finally. She's still angry, still convinced you're the villain. I don't think she'll ever let it go. That's her choice, I said. I hope someday she finds peace, but I can't make her see what she doesn't want to see. No, he stood. But I can show Emma. I can bring her here when she's older, show her the foundation her grandfather built, the art he supported, the legacy that actually matters. You're welcome anytime, I said. Both of you. He hesitated at the door. He loved you so much. I read the letter he left you. Edward showed me, with your permission. And Vanessa. I'm glad he had you. I'm glad he wasn't alone. I'm glad someone showed him what real love looks like. He showed me too, I said. That's what real love does. It's mutual. It's equal. It's choosing each other every day. Christopher nodded, smiled sadly, and left. I sat at my desk for a long time after he was gone, thinking about forgiveness and healing and the long, difficult work of becoming better. Maybe Victoria would never come around. Maybe she'd spend the rest of her life believing I'd stolen something from her. But Christopher was trying. And that mattered. Thomas would have been proud of him. I'm standing in the sculpture garden on a warm June evening, watching our third cohort of artists celebrate their residency completion. 24 people over the past 3 years, 24 lives changed, hundreds more through our workshops and community programs. The foundation is thriving. We've expanded to offer mental health support for artists, business training, connections to galleries and agents. We're everything Thomas and I dreamed about and more. I'm 38 now, 5 years older than when I met Thomas. 5 years of growth and grief and building something meaningful from loss. People still call me a gold digger sometimes. Strangers on the internet who don't know the full story, who see the age gap and make assumptions, I don't bother correcting them anymore. The people who matter know the truth. And the truth is this: I loved a man who society said I shouldn't love. I married him knowing people would judge. I lost him far too soon. And when he died, he gave me the greatest gift possible: not wealth, but purpose; not inheritance, but legacy. The foundation isn't mine. It's ours. Mine and Thomas's. Every artist we support, every grant we give, every person who walks through these doors and feels seen and valued and believed in, that's Thomas's love, still rippling out into the world. That's better than any amount of money. That's proof that love, real love, isn't about what you take from someone. It's about what you build together, what you give away, what you leave behind. Victoria never sued again, never reached out. I heard through Christopher that she's doing well, still successful, still convinced she was wronged, but moving forward with her life. I hope she finds happiness. I genuinely do. Christopher brings Emma to visit sometimes. She's 3 now, obsessed with finger painting and the sculptures in the garden. She calls me Aunt Nessa and asks to hear stories about her grandfather. I tell her about the terrible watercolors and the way he'd cry at museums and how he believed, truly believed, that art could change the world. Did it? She asked me once, smearing blue paint across a canvas. Did it change the world? I looked around at the foundation, at the artists creating and learning and growing, at the beauty we'd brought into existence. Yes, sweetheart, I said. It did, one person at a time. They called me a gold digger, said I married an old man for his money, said I manipulated him, isolated him, convinced him to turn against his children, said I was waiting for him to die so I could cash in. And when he did die, when his will was read, they expected vindication, expected proof that they'd been right all along. Instead, they got a mirror. Thomas didn't leave me millions. He left me purpose. He left the world a foundation that supports struggling artists. He left his children $1 each and a lesson they still haven't fully learned: that love can't be bought, inherited, or demanded. It can only be given freely. Was I a gold digger? Judge for yourself. Look at what I got versus what I gave. Look at where the money went. Look at what I'm doing with my life now, working 60-hour weeks to run a nonprofit, living modestly, channeling every resource into helping others. I gained a foundation to run. They lost $8 million. But more importantly, I gained 3 years with a man who taught me what real partnership looks like, who saw me, who valued me, who loved me for exactly who I was. And they lost the chance to know their father as anything other than a bank account. So who really won? I think about that sometimes. About winning and losing, about revenge and justice, about what it means to be validated. Thomas's will was his final statement, not to punish his children, but to teach them, to show them that their assumptions were wrong, that I'd never wanted their money, that love isn't transactional. I don't know if Victoria will ever understand that, but Christopher's trying. And maybe someday, Emma will tell her own children about the grandfather who believed art could change the world, and the woman who loved him enough to make that belief real. That's my legacy. Not money, not vindication, but love, multiplied and shared and given away freely, just like Thomas taught me. So let me ask you something. If you were in my position, judged, accused, called every name in the book, how would you have handled it? Would you have fought for the inheritance? Would you have walked away completely? Or would you have done what I did, honored your partner's wishes, even when it meant accepting nothing material for yourself? And if you've ever been judged for loving someone inappropriate, too old, too young, too different, how did you prove the doubters wrong? Or did you decide their opinions didn't matter? I'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, your experiences with love that didn't fit society's neat little boxes. Because that's what this was really about. Not money, not revenge, not even justice. Just love. Complicated, imperfect, genuine love. And the courage to honor it, even after death. And if you haven't yet, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because here at True Heart Voices, every story deserves to be heard, and every heart deserves to heal. Thank you for listening to my story. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one. With love.